Welcome to Living Room Conclave India Financial Series. We are discussing a very interesting topic today, financial inclusion journey of India, and will digital banking be the future for all? I have a very interesting panel today. I have Mr. Nikhil Sahni, Division President, South Asia and Country Corporate Officer, India from Mastercard. I have Mr. Ashutosh Khajuria, Executive Director, Federal Bank, and I have Brinda Jagirdar, Senior Economist. Thank you so much for joining us. Nikhil, I'll start with you. Obviously, we have seen an accelerated financial inclusion in India, and a lot of people have been covered under the banking system. And thanks to the initiatives like the Jam Trinity, which was rolled out by government so aggressively, now at this point, where are we in terms of covering the people who are still unbanked or maybe who are still left out of the financial inclusion juggernaut that we have in India?
So, Meher, that's, I think, from a context setting perspective, 459 million Jan Dhan accounts, 1.71 lakh crores of balances in those accounts, a direct benefit transfer program, which today in 2021-22 has delivered close to 6.3 lakh crores to, a set of beneficiaries across the country. So obviously we've come a long way. I think what is the next logical large step is, of course, with initiatives such as UPI, which has, frankly speaking, brought the world down in terms of understanding what India can contribute in terms of creating something which is truly Indian. It's built in India, maybe built in India for the world as times progress. I think the next step is going to be to figure out how is it that we still, kind of curtail the cash that exists in the economy. Mm-hmm. Still about 75% transactions continue to be cash. Fact of the matter is that all, of us in the ecosystem, cash is the common enemy, and the common ally will continue to be inclusion.
Right.
So that is the approach. And I think this will now move from the step of, so you talk about 63 million MSMEs in India who are still not digitized. That is, I think, a very, very significant piece. We're working towards that as an economy. 150 million farmer households in this country, of which very, very limited, households have access to credit, which is the next big thing. You have 250 million estimated skilled workers in this country. For a minute, I may want to call them the Vishwakarmas.
Right.
Looking at the traditional way we have in India explained about this segment. Huge amount of credit gap of about $400 billion when it comes to MSMEs. I think that is the next logical step in terms of banking the underbanked. So what we did with the Jam Trinity was got them into the banking net. But ultimately, banking is not only about savings. Banking is fundamentally about credit. And credit penetration, as you know, in our country still continues to be very, very low. Right. It's only at about 5-6%. If you look at it from a cards perspective, you have a 920 million debit cards and maybe about 75 million are credit cards. So it gives you a sense that it's still a product which is for the who's who. And I think that is something that we can considerably change. Initiatives such as OCAN, the way ONDC is coming up. So I think what will happen now is I think the next large wave is going to be about digitizing the MSMEs, getting in more products for the farming households, as well as bringing this so-called informal Vishwakarma work system into the economy net. And then, look at data and analytics to be able to bridge this credit gap. So for example, if you are able to address 25% of this credit gap, you are talking about a 2% nominal level growth in GDP, which is like a substantial amount, right?
That's substantial.
So I think that is what the game changer is now going to just shift towards. How is it that we can take this in terms of a next step from banking to credit? That would be my opinion.
Right. And I think it's also necessary that India sustains that kind of growth momentum, simply because a country of this size, and we need to generate employment, we need to sustain growth. So, it's fair only that we take a step in that direction. Ashutosh, my next question is for you. Now, the entire digital banking movement in India also involves beyond banks, it also involves, the business communities, the government agencies, and the beneficiaries. Now, if all these stakeholders and people who are still outside the credit net or the banking net, like Nikhil mentioned, if all of them were to come together, and if there is a synergized effort to work towards broader goal of digitized economy, I think that can only multiply the force at which India is growing.
Certainly, without doubt. So I think the problem with banks was that a very small part of the economy was formalized. Rest was more informal, particularly when we talk of MSMEs and all. So now with more formalization and all, you have some numbers on which the banks can bank and extend credit. Now, how would you extend credit to someone who has nothing to really show to the bank as far as his turnover is concerned? Now with digitization, what has happened is the movement of funds, through UPI particularly, payments being made to a person, payments made by an entrepreneur to his vendors, all these have become easier. And more it gets formalized, that is the data on which banks can work and extend credit lines. I mean, just now I think Nikhil was saying the credit card, the number of credit cards is much less than the debit cards, because in debit cards it's more of a savers tool. So savers tool is there with roughly say almost 75 to 80% of the population. I mean the eligible population, adult population covered. Whereas, for credit cards, that the number is only 75 million. The reason is for credit card, for having credit and all, credit lines and all, you need to have some so-called credit history, credit score and all that. And that credit score gets developed, when somebody is extended credit. So, I mean, where to begin with? To begin with, you need some project on which, even if it is a smaller one, small enterprise or so, some numbers as to, what could be the quantum of credit required by a particular entrepreneur and what type of limits he would need. Does he need it for a longer period with amortization of the loan amount, or does he need on a running basis, like what we have a product in India called cash credit? Now, this product probably is not there all over the world. People just rely on short-term loans, demand loans, and all those things, 7 days to 365 for working capital requirements, and for medium-term loans and long-term loans, you have the amortization loans and all that. So I think with, once you have the number, you can arrive at what could be the requirement of working capital.
Right. Brinda, this question is for you. You have obviously observed Indian economy very closely over a period of time. Now, at different stages, various schemes were launched to increase the pace of financial inclusion, be it Atal Pension Yojana, Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Similarly, a lot of schemes were also launched to bring the marginalized into the ambit of financial security. Now, what is the overall impact of all these initiatives that government has undertaken in last, let's say, a decade or so? What is your assessment?
Yeah, right now the third largest digital economy. So in terms of growth, we are the fastest. And in terms of size, we are the third largest after US and China. So having said that, the digital economy, the digital banking ecosystem is very much thriving and growing in the economy because, see, in the large private sector banks, about 80 to 85% of the transaction is done online. And about, say, 10% or so is done through the ATM. And the remaining 5% or so is done at the branch. So this itself shows you how the sector is growing. And why is it growing so much? Mainly because of the infrastructure that we have, the digital infrastructure in terms of mobile phones and in terms of the internet connectivity that has been provided. Also, the UPI push that is given, the small ticket, customers can make small ticket payments through the UPI. So that again is another encouragement. And mainly customers are looking for contactless transaction, especially that happened after the pandemic. And of course, let's not forget the cost, which is such a big pull factor. The cost of digital transaction is something like about 10 rupees perhaps. And so the ATM is about 60 rupees. And on the branch line, on through the branch, the cost comes to about 100 rupees per transaction. I mean, this is roughly, there are various estimates, but this is roughly one estimate I'm saying. So all this makes it very attractive for customers, for vendors to move on to the digital platform. Now, having said this, as you can see, the Jan Dhan Trinity, the JAM Trinity the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and the mobile has tremendous potential. As we can see that it is gaining, digital transactions are becoming very popular even in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And you don't need any kind of high degree to be able to transact on a mobile phone. So it has become very, very popular even in smaller towns and even for small ticket transactions. So having said this, your question was about credit availability. Now, credit availability is not an issue. Banks, let me just say, even the banks, the regular financial banks are also doing very well. In the last few years, they have cleaned up their balance sheets. So today, what you see, the banks are very well capitalized. They have adequate liquidity, their own as well as that provided by the Reserve Bank. The profitability is very good. The asset quality is very good. Like the Reserve Bank's financial stability report also pointed out that the bank capital adequacy at banks is about 16.7% now, as against 15.8% last year. The provision coverage ratio is also very good, more than 70%, and the gross NPAs, that is about 5% plus. So therefore, their asset quality and the risk metrics have all been under control. What you talked about, financial literacy, that is something which needs to be spread more, and people need to become more aware, because as we work on the digital ecosystem, I think we have to be more aware of the digital security, cyber security, our own, securing our own passwords, etc. So that kind of a knowledge, I think, needs to be disseminated on a larger scale. And we need the help of not just the Reserve Bank, but also a lot of NGOs and banks themselves to make customers aware of this of financial literacy. Maybe we can do it in schools and colleges.
Yeah, I think that's a big one, because I think in our schools, there is a huge scope of actually improving the financial literacy, even at a secondary level. Ashutosh, now, obviously we have discussed about the financial inclusion, the credit inclusion, but one very important point that I think Brinda pointed out was the financial education, and second is the cyber security. And obviously this begins at banks level and RBI's level, like we have seen, and they have been aggressively trying to educate people. But how do we cover the last mile in this?
Yeah, so I think Brinda has raised a very valid point. I think, if you want the inclusion to be more effective, I think the education is equally important, because one, slip and there is a mistrust or something like that with one accident, you lose the confidence on the system as a whole. So today, if we can say with pride that UPI has brought so many people on its, platform or so, and just adding to digital transactions, it's partly because people have developed a trust in it. I mean, you had almost negligible or almost nil accidents on that. When the money gets siphoned off or something like that happens, due to some unscrupulous elements penetrating, hacking or doing something, or phishing, duping people and all, you have more challenge to that particular technology or that particular way of transacting. And then people want to go back to their the manual systems also. But please remember, I think one point was raised about the cost and all. You just can't compare the cost of brick and mortar banking and the digital banking or mobile banking. Digital banking just brings the cost to fraction of what happens to brick and mortar. And this is the reason, despite nationalization, despite having so many regional rural banks, you had the parallel system of cooperative banks and all, the financial inclusion was not complete. And in this Janadhan or so, it was possible because of technology. It was possible because of the digital approach towards that we could have so many of account holders there and all. So it's important for people to they need to know about how the systems work and how it is safe to do the transactions also. And for that, yes, role of RBI could do it, through media, I mean, all those RBI Kehta Hai series or so, but it's the banks, is the, lenders who actually are the last mile contact with the consumers, with the customers or so, who need to tell them, do's and don'ts of, the system, this system, because that's very, very important. You share your CVV, or you share your, one-time password, OTP or so. So what type of risks are there in it? How it entails, and suddenly, your entire balance can be just swept off or so. So yes, sharing of information, dissemination of products, dissemination of the rights, the obligations, all these things are very, very important.
Right. Nikhil, now what is Mastercard's approach? Because obviously it happens to be one of the core pillars about financial inclusion, digital banking, and overall banking system also in India and obviously across the world. So, what is Mastercard's vision or approach to bridge the digital divide at the bottom of the pyramid?
So I'll possibly take this and answer this on three facets, Mihir. First and foremost is, if you look at MSMEs, and we're talking about the real micro MSMEs, right, where there is a credit shortfall, we want them to come into the digital net. So first and foremost, what we have tried to enable in those ecosystems is acceptance.
Okay.
So that digital acceptance is something that starts to happen, whether it's a scan and pay acceptance, or it's a soft POS, or if it's a actual POS machine. So that is the first and foremost thing that you do to digitize the value chain of the MSMEs, which actually starts to get them into the digital net. The second thing that we have tried to do is we've done a small pilot on farmers. We call it the community farm pass project, and we've actually got 300,000 farmers onboarded on a platform. And 30% of them are active. It's a platform which allows them to sell their produce, but digitally. And what we've seen is that, nearly 40% better yields in terms of what farmers get if they come onto the platform. Now, obviously, it's a small number. It's still impacting, let's say a small 1,000 number of farmers, but it is an impact item. And we fundamentally believe with, as I said, 150 million farmer households, 45 to 50% of farmers not having the capability to have access to credit because they're not in the net, right? So that's the second piece which we are trying to do. We believe that's a very, very large component that can be, kind of incorporated. The third thing is, and I take a cue from what, Ashutosh was just saying, in terms of the cyber piece and the cyber security piece, because it's about resilience, right? So we introduce more and more products which make it easier for the systems itself to detect when there's a fraud coming in. So today you have artificial intelligence, you have machine learning, you have tools available which can assess whether there is a certain activity which is not in line with your regular transactional activity, right? And that's research, and this technology actually gives you those pointers. Ashutosh was mentioning about CVV. Today there is technology which will be available, which will allow you to do straight pass-through. You don't even need to enter a CVV or a password at all. There will be nothing that is required. And there are such technologies which have already been developed. They are very, very actively under consideration at the regulators level to be able to, have straight pass-through. So that's the third thing which enables. I think the fourth things on which we are actually trying to focus as an organization is, if you look at the core Indian rural sector side, I think if there is something that we can do to promote the cause of women entrepreneurs, that has been another area of focus. RBI has introduced digital Sahni. We are trying to see, because if you can have focused products on the women entrepreneur side, again to digitize, because again, credit from a women entrepreneur perspective becomes complicated, because as we know, land holdings, etc. in our country are never, under the purview of women. So fundamentally, that is also something that we're trying to create a lot of digital literacy programs which are focused on women entrepreneurs, and using them, as we were just discussing, as, maybe catalysts in taking the digital literacy, message across. Because fundamentally, and I'm saying this in all fairness, I think when there is the power for women behind all of this, it generally works better in India's heartland. So those would be some of the initiatives that you've taken.
That's very interesting. In fact, Brinda, I want to bring you in, and I'll just extend this question. He spoke about women entrepreneurs. I am extending it to overall financial inclusion of women. Now, we have seen a sea change since, I would say, Jan Dhan was introduced and a lot of other schemes. But what is your sense? I mean, what has exactly changed, and what kind of initiatives we need to take to maybe further actually do more inclusive growth when it comes to financial initiatives for women?
Yes, you're right. I mean, as I say, women hold up half the sky. So inclusion of women is very important if you want to go the last mile, if you want to include people at the grassroots, and if you want to bridge the digital divide. And I think all the initiatives by the NGOs and even the banks and self-help groups are doing a great job, and the results are there for all to see. Having said this, what more needs to be done? I agree with both Nikhil and Ashutosh. They've said that there should be end-to-end digital process rather than having just digital touch points while keeping the processes physical. So I think this will make it very easy, and it will also help, no frauds, and it will make it tamper-proof. So I think this is a very important initiative which needs to be done. The second I would say is to simplify. Banks need to simplify. Like, for example, if you look at the mobile apps of banks, customers use it for about, say, 3 to 4 transactions. But if you look at GPay, PhonePe, and these other apps, they are used much more, 7 to 8 or even 9, 10 times, 10 transactions per customer. So we need to simplify these processes. We need to simplify these apps. Then I would also say that, right now, 80% of the applications, I mean, the customers use the apps for 80% of the time for making payments. So why not extend these to, say, investments also, and for cross-selling and other activities? So banks will find greater value add in this kind of initiative.
Absolutely. So Nikhil, it's a matter of time before we start chasing the number 2 position in the highest digitized economy in the world. It's a matter of time.
Yeah, it is most definitely, I guess. And as I said, there are aspects to this which we have taken. So I think we've done a fairly decent job in terms of taking the digitally naive to being digitally native. I think that is a very, very significant path that India has chosen, and creating digital solutions which are the typical ABCD of digital solutions: affordable, beneficial, convenient, and dependable. I think the game is in the last D word, which is actually, the D word for trust. I think that is what is going to take us to the next level. So the more we develop, and which is where cyber solutions, making people comfortable with the fact that this will indeed go through, it's not going to be fraudulent. And as we've discussed, many initiatives from a technology front which are coming in, and they are enabling it to become much more seamless. So I think, yes, there is this threat of frauds, but if we do all of this together, I think digital today it's an expectation. It's a customer expectation.
Yeah.
So
it's the most natural thing.
It is.
Absolutely. Nikhil, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation. Brinda, you too, and Ashutosh ji, you too. Thank you so much for joining us on this interesting conversation under Living Room Conclave India Financial Series. Thank you.